And thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. The purpose of today's session is to do two things. One is to talk a little bit about the history and the motivation of why LAOS and why Freeverse is building LAOS. And the second half is to talk a little bit more about where we're going to go for the roadmap in 2024. A technical side, and the other one will be on the go-to-market side and the marketing activities that we have planned. So essentially what we're going to do today is start with a little bit of history on Freeverse, right? And more importantly, the history of where LAOS came from. So Freeverse, I think we talked about it in the very first hour. We talked about a bit of how the Freeverse started off as a gaming company originally, and then moved into becoming a platform and then a layer 2, because the technology we developed originally for the game that we developed was a layer 2 technology that enabled dynamic NFTs. We call them living assets. And what happened after that was that we realized that the technology in the layer 2 that we had developed was probably better as a platform that could be used by many people rather than just one game. So we opened it up, and we opened up our layer 2. And that went very well. So you know, we still have clients that are using the layer 2 right now, such as the car manufacturer Cupra. We have some games on there, notably Striker Manager 3 that went live on the Epic Game Store recently. A good game called Pixels, which is a fun sort of mining game, RPG game. And all these use our layer 2, and the transactions on that layer 2, they can be you can trade in fiat currencies as well as cryptocurrencies. And it's all kind of cool. But what we realized was, around about a year ago, we realized that the layer 2 approach is, to a certain extent, it's kind of limited, right? To a certain extent, it's kind of limited. You have to make a lot of, shortcuts is the wrong word. You have to sort of limit yourself in certain ways to make sure that you're doing the right thing, right? And so, yes, you may have accelerated transactions per second. You may have an accelerated throughput. You might have more flexibility, but you're making compromises. That's the word I wanted to define. You're making compromises as to particularly the decentralization of what you're doing. And in fact, just today I was looking at a super interesting page. You can see it's called l2beat.com, and it shows you a comparison of all the different layer 2s that are out there. And it gives you a whole analysis of what they're doing right and what they're doing perhaps they could do a little bit better. And you'll notice that every single one of those layer 2s has some form of compromise baked into it. And so, and that's including ours, right? Our layer 2 is great. It works very well. It's super. We're very proud of it. But a lot of the downsides of layer 2s are you have to wrap or bridge currency into that layer 2 to use it. You know, sometimes depending on the structure of that layer 2, the time to settle on the layer 1 may take more time. You may, if you're using some sort of like a zero knowledge approach, have to use quite a lot of computing power to compute the hash and so on and so forth. So for every advantage, there is a counter compromise that you have to implement. And so around about a year ago, we started looking at this and thought, okay, so what is the best technological approach to counter those compromises? And but still maintain the flexibility and the power and the benefits of our layer 2. And thus was born the idea of launching our own layer 1, which was LAOS, right? As it came out of it, and originally LAOS was going to stand for Living Assets Open System, but then we realized that actually the scope of what we could achieve was much greater than simply just doing dynamic NFTs and living assets. And so when we started looking into that, we started looking into where we would like to do it, and kind of the 3 options that we were looking at, 3 or 4 options we were looking at. One was doing it all on our own, launching a brand new layer 1 all on our own. That's obviously tricky, right? There's a lot more work involved, but it's good because you control everything. The other was to go as some sort of parachain or use something like what they're doing with Avalanche, some sort of like a separate subchain like there. And we settled on Polkadot. We settled on Polkadot for a couple of reasons. The principal reason, I think, from the get-go was the fact that Polkadot gives you security from day one, right? You're relying on Polkadot security to make your own chain. If you're doing it on something like Cosmos, which Cosmos is great, but you have to implement your own security, and that's not quite so. It adds a little bit more overhead in terms of work and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that we were looking at as well with Polkadot, very interestingly, was the idea of the cross-messaging protocol, not XEM, and the third version in particular specifies this thing called universal location, and we saw that was a good idea, a good way of enabling true cross-chain communication, right? And if the concept of, universal location is a concept, right? It's not like, it's a concept that you implement by saying, right, I'm going to refer to this particular consensus system and this particular smart contract and this particular asset via a URL, right? In the same way that you would do so with, for example, the internet, right? Or the web, should I say, right? You can, or even the internet, right? You have protocols, and you can specify those protocols and dive down into each of those things. So we went away and started learning about Polkadot and sent our engineers to the Polkadot Academy, right? The Substrate Builders program, to learn more about the Polkadot system and learn about programming in Rust and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we started looking into what would be the use cases that we could build using LAOS. What are the use cases beyond dynamic NFTs that we could build into that? And the two sort of I think high level use cases are scaling, right? So scaling of EVM chains. And also extending the metadata which is existing on other chains. So the scaling one is a very simple one. It's like saying, okay, well, I want to scale all minting on Ethereum, and despite the fact that that minting on Ethereum has dropped since its heyday, it's still very high, right? It's still I think in total between Ethereum and Polygon, I think if I remember correctly, it was around about 200 million tokens that were minted in the last year, and we're supposed to be in a bear market. So what's going to happen in a bull market, we don't know. What we do see is that there is a minting pressure on the mature chains like Ethereum. And that's why we have all these layer 2s. That's why we have all these compromises, whether they're Arbitrum or Optimism or Immutable or Starknet or whatever you want. There are a bunch of layer 2s who are promising, and Polygon, of course, is one of the most established ones. There are a bunch of layer 2s who are promising an increased amount of transaction speed, throughput, in exchange for the compromises that exist that were mentioned earlier on. And we thought, well, okay, let's see if we can tackle that and bring the inherent scaling that's in Polkadot, right? And essentially allow the throughput of a parachain on Polkadot to offload that minting pressure from those EVM chains, right? And that's great because it benefits the Polkadot ecosystem, right? And it benefits the Ethereum ecosystem as well, and the EVM ecosystem too. And so when we want to be friends and partners with both sides of those ecosystems, and I think that's something we're working on right now. And the other interesting thing coming from that as well that we looked into was the idea of extending the metadata. It's something we've looked at for quite some time, and it leads to some super interesting use cases that we've talked about on other AMAs in the past. We've talked about looking into the idea of just with standard collectibles, right? Let's start with collectibles. You can extend the metadata of a collectible, give it a new life, perhaps a seasonality, perhaps a different utility within a certain time frame. It also allows you to extend the utility of assets in a video game, right? For example, if there's an asset that already exists, you're creating a game, you can instantly extend the data associated with any asset you want to give it utility within the game you're developing. So it does open up those doors to true cross-game compatibility, and that's something we're quite excited to be looking into over the next few months and hopefully years. So those are the two features that we decided to build, and we started creating LAOS, and as you probably will know if you're here or you're seeing this or recording this later on, LAOS as KLAOS, Kusama LAOS, was launched on the Kusama chain at the start of December. It's been there for a while now, processing blocks. We launched the very first dApp on that, which is the Bridgeless Minter, which allows you to mint assets on Ethereum and Polygon, right? Regular ERC-721 tokens on Ethereum and Polygon without paying any ETH or Matic once you've created the original collection. And now over the next few weeks, we're going to start releasing the initial implementation of the metadata extension functionality. And so that leads us segues on nicely from where we have been and sort of what the motivation for LAOS was into really what we're going to be doing for the roadmap for 2024, and particularly for the first half of 2024. And I'm going to start off by talking about the technical or the product features that we're going to be developing over the next few weeks. And then I'm going to finish off today by talking a little bit more about the actual marketing and go-to-market approaches that we're going to be implementing over the next few weeks too. So I'm just going to grab a sip of water.
Quick, can you hear me now by any chance?
We have the Bridgeless Minter that's up and running. It's being used. There have been assets that have been minted on Ethereum and have been purchased, which is super. One of the things we've noticed is that when people come and test the Bridgeless minting application, they're reluctant to spend their own Ethereum or Matic to create a collection from scratch. So one of the things that was planning to be launched by the end of the month is a default public collection, right? And so the way that will work is that they will create a collection on LAOS, which anybody can mint to, right? They will have to still play with gas with LAOS tokens, but anyone will have the permission to mint into that collection. And that means that once that collection is linked to a prior created collection that we will create, right? We'll create a generic public collection on Ethereum and one on Polygon as well. And everyone will be able to mint their tokens without having to create a collection to start off with, right? So that will open the doors to allow people to try out the Bridgeless Minter without having to create a collection and spend their hard-earned crypto on creating a collection in the first place, and they can mint an unlimited number of tokens after that. And the cool thing about that is as well is that you can link that, and those tokens will go straight to OpenSea, right? Or in fact any other marketplace that will pick up the broadcast. And they'll be able to be traded, so people will be able to mint straight away and trade. So that will come at the end of the month. The public collections for the Bridgeless Minter, and then after that, we're going to focus on implementing the decentralized metadata extensions. The idea is here, and that's something that's already in the back end side of things. It's already getting there. It's already kind of almost in place, and we have the designs and the initial implementations for the front end app. The idea is you'll be able to identify any token you want, nominally on any blockchain, and then permissionlessly add your metadata to that token. So you're adding that functionality to that. And so that is essentially a series of attributes, right? So you might add an image, or I might add an animation, or a 3D file, or a property, right? You know, if you're trying to have you've got a car and you want to implement a faster version of the car, you could say top speed is going to be, you know, 220 rather than 150. You can modify that data. So that'll be coming soon, probably within February. I would imagine that will appear. And then finally, to link all those things together, we have this thing called a universal node. And the universal node is kind of like a shortcut which allows marketplaces to read LAOS at the same time as reading their EVM chains. Or in fact, not just marketplaces, but any application that's building on LAOS. At the moment, if you want to understand LAOS, you can connect to the LAOS node, of which there are several running, and you can go to our GitHub page to get the addresses of some of those running, and you can connect to them if you like, or you can run your own node. But there's also a standard EVM node. So you want to know what the collection is, what the Ethereum collection is, then you have to run an EVM node and run that, or go and search it somewhere else. And you run your LAOS node as well as a separate thing. What we're doing is we're bringing those two things together into a universal node. And that means that marketplaces, take for example OpenSea is a classic example. They can run a standard EVM node, but they can actually run a universal node, which will have an EVM node and a LAOS node all in one. And that will enable those, a simple call, one call to that single node will be able to make sense of the Bridgeless minting feature and the metadata extension feature as well, without having to do two separate connections to two separate chains. So that's kind of a way of simplifying things for developers. Okay, so those are the three things that will come up in the near future, and hopefully those three things will be launched before we launch the token, right? So the plan is to launch the token around about the end of March. One of the not doubts, but one of the uncertainties that exists is regarding Polkadot's 2.0, right? Where the pay-as-you-go block space. This is something that obviously is a good thing, I think, for Polkadot, because it's Polkadot's block space is unused right now. So this is a way of freeing it up from you don't have to have however many dots to reserve your parachain slot. If you want to start using block space, you can, and I think that's really super. I think that's going to be really good for the Polkadot ecosystem in general, and I'm a big proponent of it. I also think that as it stands, because the plan is to release that in Q1 this year. Well, we're now starting Q1, and it's not around the corner yet. It hasn't been released in Kusama yet. Even so, we're going to see how that comes, and the timing of when that Polkadot 2 actually does get, the runtime gets upgraded and you can start using that, will affect our plans to launch LAOS. We don't know whether we're going to launch it as a traditional parachain via the auction system, or we're going to be one of the first parachains to use the new pay as you go approach, if you like, right? One way or another, the token will launch one way or another, probably at the end of March. We will do some sort of canary token to help reward those people who are helping promote LAOS in the short term. Before then, that will be some sort of soul-bound ERC20, which will have a one-on-one relationship to the actual final token that will be released. And then the actual final launch of LAOS will depend entirely on the timing of Polkadot 2.0 and the release of all that. In the meantime, the likelihood is that we will stay in Kusama and actually start even using Kusama as a sort of production environment, and then upgrade our Kusama chain to Polkadot when the time is right. A couple of parachains have done that in the past. I think there's 2 parachains that have done a direct upgrade from Kusama to Polkadot. And then there's also the final option of copying, the Moonbeam approach and having, one chain with value in Kusama and one chain with value in Polkadot. I'm not sure we're going to go down that approach. I suspect the likely approach will be we'll do an upgrade or some sort of transfer of the things that are in Kusama into Polkadot. But again, unfortunately, we have to wait until there's more clarity regarding Polkadot 2.0 in terms of the actual final timeline to launch. But it will be around about the end of Q1, start of Q2, something like that, I should imagine. So that's the roadmap for the next time in terms of product features and developments and tokens development. I'm going to finish off today talking a little bit in the 5 minutes that we have left to talk a little bit about the go-to-market approaches that we have. And this is super exciting. This is where it starts getting very interesting. When we're talking about marketing a new chain, there are 2 target audiences, right? There are token holders, people who are interested in the token itself and the value the token has, and of course the builders, the people that are going to be building on LAOS. Both need each other. One requires the other in a mutually beneficial relationship. So for the token holders, we're already starting this process, and I'm pleased to hear we have our LAOS ambassadors. We had our first LAOS ambassadors sort of general meeting yesterday, which went super well. I'm very grateful for their help and their advice, and we're already starting to implement some of the advice and suggestions they have. We're going to be expanding that ambassadors program as well via some more established portals. And of course, all the work there is going to be rewarded with tokens, which hopefully will boost the community and boost also the distribution of the token, which is a great thing. And then we also need to start appealing to the builders, right? And this is where the work will start in the next few months coming up seriously. We need to get game developers, we need to get collection creators, and eventually we need to get companies that are looking at doing real world assets to be building on LAOS, right? And so I think there's a flywheel attraction that will come as we start developing things. We're already in discussions with some collections to bring their collections over to LAOS, or to help, or at least mirror their collections onto LAOS in some form, shape, or form. We'll see how that works out. I'm very enthusiastic about that. In fact, we're going to be publishing an article about the future of collectibles, digital collectibles, what we think is the future of digital collectibles in the next day or 2, which is cool. Then, of course, we've got gaming, and so we'll be going to some of the big gaming conferences, including the Game Developers Conference, GDC, to have a chat with all the Web3 game developers there and explain to them the benefits. Essentially, the simple benefit is how you're going to be saving money, right? By building on LAOS, you're not going to be paying so much gas to mint all these tokens, whilst you're staying in those mature ecosystems that you want to be on as a game developer. So that's kind of exciting. And then later on in the year, we'll be going to Consensus. We're going to the Real World Asset Summit as well, to sort of talk about how we can bring real world assets at mass scale into LAOS as well. So there's a whole bunch of promotional events. We're going to do some side events. Particularly, we're thinking of doing a side event at Paris Blockchain Week. And then in parallel to all that, we have a whole series of interesting marketing exclusive ideas that are fun to talk about, right? So we're, whether it's working with influencers to sort of create collections for free on LAOS to see how many of their followers can create a collection and how popular those collections are, whether it's using AI to generate images that can be published, on a weekly basis, or have some sort of competition where we're creating tokens every week and judging how popular they are and rewarding the popularity of those tokens, or whether we are doing silly ideas, like one idea a silly idea, which is actually quite a fun idea, right? It could be quite serious. We published in our community today a call for categories for not the Oscars but the LAOScars, which I thought was quite an interesting turn of phrase. So we have the idea of what are the categories for what if you're going to do an Oscars ceremony for the Web3 world, what would the categories be? What would you use for those categories? And how would you judge those categories? And so we're going to be putting a call out to try and get people involved to sort of say, okay, what are the categories you would use for the LAOScars, the Web3 Oscars, and what are the terms that you would use to judge them, and who would you nominate for those categories as well? And so you can do all those sort of things, and that will, of course, whether it's through the community, whether it's through the social media networks, you can start driving some interest, and it'll gain some attention in LAOS. And of course, you're pushing it back to the idea of being able to mint an unlimited number of assets, basically, right, for only LAOS tokens without paying the tokens of the mature chains. So we're very excited about those activities. And and that's sort of the plan that we have for the next few months. I think the first conference we're going to be going to and hopefully speaking at will be ETH Denver, right, which is at the end of February. Then I already have my speaking slot at NFT NYC, which would be the third time I've been there. And we'll be going to the Games Developers Conference, as I mentioned, probably Tokyo 2049 as well in Dubai this year. So it's going to be quite a busy February, March, April, May in terms of the conference circuit, but we're all looking forward to it very much. So it's now hour. I'm not sure if Nachos' microphone has fixed. You can shake your head or nod your head, depending what you want to say, Nacho.
I don't know if you can hear me.
No, your microphone is not fixed. So I'm going to leave it here for any questions. I'm not sure if I can see questions, how I see questions in here. So I need to go to the left-hand side of the thingy. That side. Okay, right, good. Inbox, show requests, more, change topic, no request to speak. Can't see any. There's questions up here on the right. I see them. You guys lead. If there are any questions here on the main stage, then please do type them into the chat. And if not, then we'll leave it there for today. And thank you very much for your time. And thank you for joining us. And we'll see you the next time on the next LAOS AMA. Take care. Goodbye.